There is a number that appears 3 times in the most ancient texts of Jewish wealth wisdom. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And every family I have ever known that understood this number truly understood it, not as a curiosity but as an operating principle, moved through their financial life in a way that others could not explain. They did not always have more. In fact, sometimes they had considerably less than their neighbors. But they moved differently. They decided differently. And over time, not quickly, never quickly, the ground beneath their feet became solid in a way that other people's ground never did. I am Rabbi Naomi, and I have spent 31 years inside the texts of Kabbalistic financial wisdom, the writings of the Hafetz Chaim, the teachings passed down through my grandmother's family, who carried this knowledge out of Vilna, out of a world that was trying to erase it. I am going to share with you today the 555 principle, what it is, where it comes from, and the exact way it is meant to be applied. But you must stay with me until the very end. If you take only part of this, the structure is incomplete. A 3-legged stool with one leg missing does not wobble. It falls. So stay with me. And before we go any further, I want you to type the words, "I am ready to receive," in the comments right now. Do it before we move on. When you make a declaration openly, even in this space, you create a spiritual intention that prepares the ground for what you are about to receive. Type it now. Let me tell you what I have seen more times than I can count in my years of teaching. I have sat across from people, intelligent, hardworking, genuinely good people, who are absolutely baffled by their own financial lives. They are not spending recklessly. They are not avoiding the work. They have savings apps and budget spreadsheets, and they have read the books that everyone tells them to read. And still the money arrives and finds somewhere to go before they can direct it. Still the progress comes in bursts and then stalls. Still there is this persistent, grinding feeling that they are running a race whose finish line keeps moving. And the painful part, the part that sits in the chest at night, is not even the numbers. It is the question underneath the numbers. The question that nobody talks about out loud. What is wrong with me that I cannot seem to make this work? I want you to hear me clearly on this. There is nothing wrong with you. But there is something wrong with the framework you were given. The mainstream financial world teaches you to manage money. It does not teach you to understand it. It teaches you to budget, to track, to optimize, to hustle, to save. What it does not teach you, what it has never taught you, is how money actually moves. Not through spreadsheets, not through compound interest tables, through the invisible architecture of intention and structure that governs whether wealth accumulates in a life or quietly drains out of it. The sages understood this, not as philosophy, as mechanics, as something that can be applied with the same precision that you would apply a mathematical formula. And the 555 rule is one of the most elegant expressions of that mechanics that I have ever encountered in 31 years of study. My grandmother came to this country with almost nothing. I mean this in the most literal sense. She arrived at the age of 22 with a small suitcase, a photograph, and the equivalent of 14 American dollars in the currency of a country that no longer exists. By the time she was 50, she had raised 4 children, buried a husband, and owned outright, without a single debt, the building that housed her bakery and the apartment above it. People asked her throughout her life how she had done it. She would smile the way she always smiled, slowly from the corner of her mouth, and she would say, "I never moved money without asking it 3 questions first." I was 7 years old the first time I heard her say this. I was sitting at her kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, a gray November morning, and she was drinking tea from a glass the way her mother had taught her. I did not understand what she meant. I asked her what the 3 questions were. She put the glass down. She looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "Not yet, Naomi. You have to be ready to understand the answer before I give it to you." I spent years thinking she had been mysterious on purpose, the way grandmothers sometimes are. But I understand now, decades later, that she was right. The answer requires a foundation. Without that foundation, the answer lands in the wrong place and produces nothing. So let me build that foundation for you before I give you the rule itself. In Kabbalistic tradition, the number 5 does not appear by accident. The 5 books of the Torah, the 5 levels of the soul in Kabbalah, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechidah, the 5 fingers of the Hamsa, which the tradition describes not as superstition, but as a tool for the channeling of blessing. 5 is the number of intentional action in the physical world. It is the number of directed will. When the sages wanted to describe something that was done with full consciousness, not by habit, not by accident, not by default, they returned again and again to structures built on 5. The Mishnah Brura, the foundational halachic text that my grandmother kept on her nightstand alongside her prayer book, contains a passage that is almost never quoted in financial discussions because it appears in a section on Shabbat observance, and most people reading it are focused on the religious law rather than the embedded principle. The passage speaks of the obligation to prepare, not to react, not to respond, to prepare. And it specifies, in language that I have always found striking for its precision, that preparation must happen in 3 domains: the domain of what you have, the domain of what you give, and the domain of what you build toward. 3 domains, each of them requiring its own 5-part accounting, 3 sets of 5. The pattern that becomes, in practice, the 5-5-5 rule. Here is how it works. Here is the exact structure. The first 5 is the rule of 5 destinations. Before any significant sum of money moves, and I will tell you in a moment what significant means, it must be consciously directed to one of exactly 5 destinations. Not 3, not 7, 5. The first destination is provision, what sustains the immediate life. Food, shelter, the basic obligations that keep the household functioning. The second destination is seed, money set apart specifically to grow, not to be touched, not to be borrowed from, not to be redirected. It is seed. You plant it and you do not dig it back up. The third destination is covenant, what is given away with intention. In the Jewish tradition, this is tzedakah, but I want you to understand that the principle is not specifically religious. It is structural. Money that moves out of your hand with genuine generosity activates a principle the sages described as opening the upper channels of provision. The fourth destination is protection, what sits between you and disaster. Not investment, not opportunity. Protection, a cushion, a reserve, a wall between your household and the sudden crisis. The fifth destination is expansion, money directed consciously toward growth, opportunity, learning, or capacity. Not every sum needs to reach the fifth destination, but no sum should move without first being consciously assigned to one of the 5. This is not budgeting. Budgeting tells you what you spent after the fact. The rule of 5 destinations tells money where it is going before it moves. The difference between those 2 approaches is the difference between being carried by a current and directing a ship. Now let me tell you what I mean by significant, because this is where people make a mistake, and it is a costly one. They hear this teaching and they think it applies only to large sums. It does not. The threshold for significance is not an amount, it is a decision. Anytime you are making a financial decision, not a habitual payment, not a utility bill, not a subscription that you set up years ago and that simply continues, but any time you are actively choosing where money goes, that choice is significant, and it belongs inside this structure. The sages said, "Do not despise small beginnings." This was not encouragement, it was instruction. The small decisions, made habitually without intention, create the channels through which larger money will later flow, or not flow. The habit of intentional direction, practiced on small decisions, becomes the architecture that handles large ones correctly when they arrive. The second 5 is the rule of 5 questions. This is what my grandmother was pointing to that November morning, though she never called it by this name. Before any significant financial commitment, a purchase, an investment, a partnership, a contract, 5 questions must be answered. Not considered. Answered. Out loud if possible. On paper if you are willing. The first question is, does this serve my provision, my seed, my covenant, my protection, or my expansion? If you cannot answer this question clearly, you do not yet understand the decision you are making, and you are not ready to make it. The second question is, what is the worst realistic outcome if this goes wrong, and can my household survive it? Not the catastrophic fantasy outcome, the realistic one. The thing that actually happens in the lives of real people when things of this kind go wrong. If the realistic worst outcome is survivable, you may proceed. If it is not, you must either restructure the decision or decline it. The third question is, am I being moved by clarity or by urgency? Urgency is almost always a manipulation. It is either external, someone is creating artificial time pressure to prevent you from thinking clearly, or it is internal, which means your own fear or excitement is manufacturing a deadline that does not actually exist. Clarity is the only valid ground for a significant financial decision. If you are being moved by urgency, wait. Whatever you will lose by waiting is almost always less than what you will lose by deciding badly. The fourth question is, who benefits from this decision besides me? This question is not about charity, it is about alignment. Money that flows through decisions that benefit others alongside yourself tends to sustain. Money that flows through purely extractive decisions, decisions where the benefit stops with you, tends to create invisible friction that compounds over time. The sages called this the principle of mutual blessing. It is not mystical. You can observe it in practice by watching which business relationships last and which ones collapse. The fifth question is, have I waited the full time? In the tradition, significant financial decisions were not made the same day the opportunity was identified. There was a waiting period, not to delay, but to allow the initial emotional response to settle so that the actual evaluation could occur. My grandmother's practice was to wait 3 days on any decision involving what she considered a meaningful sum. During those 3 days, she slept on it. She prayed over it. She watched whether the opportunity became clearer or murkier as the excitement faded. If it was still clear on the third morning, she acted. If it had become murky, she declined. 31 years of teaching has shown me that this single practice, the waiting period before significant financial commitment, has a higher correlation with sound financial outcomes than almost any other practice I know. Now I need to say something that may be uncomfortable to hear, and I am going to say it plainly because it is too important to soften. Some of you are making the same financial decisions over and over again and experiencing the same results and telling yourselves that the problem is external. The economy, the timing, the lack of opportunity, the people around you. I say this without judgment, but I say it directly. This is the behavior of someone who is not yet ready to build. Building requires looking at your own patterns before you look at the conditions around you. The tradition is very clear on this. You cannot change the water in a vessel that has a hole in the bottom. First, you find the hole. First, you understand your own patterns. The 5 questions are a tool for that. Not once, not on special occasions, but as a regular practice applied to every significant decision, they will begin to show you your own patterns in a way that nothing else will. You will see which question you always skip. You will see which question makes you uncomfortable. That discomfort is information. It is pointing directly at the whole. The third 5 is the rule of 5 witnesses. This is the most misunderstood element of the 555 structure, and it is the one that most people either dismiss or ignore, and it is precisely the one that carries the most weight. The principle, drawn from the tradition of communal accountability that runs through the entire structure of Jewish life, is this: no financial decision of significance should be made in isolation. Not because you need permission, not because you lack the capacity to decide, but because isolation is where our worst financial thinking lives. When we make decisions alone, particularly emotional financial decisions, we have no check on our own distortions. We see what we want to see. We hear what we want to hear. We weight the factors according to our fears and our desires rather than according to reality. The 5 witnesses are not 5 other people who vote on your decision. They are 5 different perspectives that must be consulted before the decision is finalized. The first witness is someone who has done this specific thing before, not something like it, this specific thing, and who can speak to the realistic mechanics of how it works. The second witness is someone who has no financial stake in your decision, and therefore no incentive to tell you what you want to hear. The third witness is the historical record. Not stories, not testimonials, but the actual documented record of how decisions of this kind have performed over time. The fourth witness is your own body. The tradition holds, and modern neuroscience has confirmed this in ways that the sages could not have anticipated, that the physical body registers what the mind has not yet processed. When you explain a financial decision out loud to another person, your body responds. Notice whether you are speaking with ease or whether something tightens. Notice whether the clarity in your head becomes clouder or clearer when it has to pass through your voice. The fifth witness is time. As I said above, you wait. You let the decision sit. Wisdom does not evaporate in 3 days, and what is truly an opportunity is still there on the 4th morning. I have seen this 3-part structure, the 5 destinations, the 5 questions, the 5 witnesses, applied by people who were starting from almost nothing. I want to tell you about a student of mine, a woman named Devora, not her real name, who came to my teaching series about 4 years ago. She was 53 years old. She had worked her entire adult life and had saved by that point just under $8,000. That was everything. She was not poor by the behavior. She was not extravagant. She was not reckless. But she was moving through her financial life entirely on instinct and reaction. And her instincts, formed in a childhood where money was always emergency and never structure, were quietly destroying her capacity to build. Over the course of about 8 months, she applied this structure. Not perfectly. She would tell you herself, she would insist, that she made mistakes, that there were months where she slipped back into the old patterns, that the third 5 in particular, the witnesses, was the piece she resisted most because it required vulnerability, and she had spent 50 years being self-sufficient. But she held to the framework. She made the practice consistent even when it was uncomfortable. And at the end of 18 months, she had restructured her financial life to the point where she had tripled her saved reserve, eliminated the one remaining consumer debt that had been following her for 6 years, and identified, through the 5 questions applied repeatedly to her professional situation, a pivot in her work that increased her monthly income by 1/3 within about 4 months of implementation. Nothing miraculous, nothing overnight. The timeline was real. The work was real. What changed was the structure underneath the decisions. There will come a moment, I want to prepare you for this now because it is coming, when you begin applying this framework and you encounter significant resistance, not from outside, from inside. You will have a financial decision in front of you, and the urgency will feel real, and someone will be waiting for your answer, and the 5 questions will feel like an obstacle rather than a protection. And you will think, I don't have time for this process. I need to decide now. That feeling, that exact feeling, is the test. It is not a coincidence that the resistance arrives at precisely the moment of highest importance. The tradition says, the closer you are to the blessing, the stronger the opposing force. This is not mysticism, it is psychology. It is the well-documented human tendency to abandon structured thinking at the exact moment it is most needed, when stakes are high and emotion is activated. The inoculation against this is to know it is coming before it arrives. To decide now, in the calm of this moment, that when you feel that urgency, you will name it. You will say, "This is the test," and then you will wait anyway. The 5-5-5 principle is the foundation, but a foundation alone does not build a house. There is an entire architecture of practice, additional principles from the same tradition, applied with the same precision, that completes the structure. I have spent the last several years assembling these teachings into a form that can be worked with practically, not just understood intellectually. If what I have shared today has opened something for you, the complete framework, including the extended teaching on the 5 witnesses, the specific practice for applying the rule of 5 destinations to irregular income, and the Kabbalistic wealth principles that sit above and beneath the 5-5-5 structure, all of that is available in the resource I will link in the description of this video. It is not a shortcut. Nothing I have ever taught is a shortcut, but it is the complete architecture, and you deserve the complete architecture, not just the foundation. If this teaching reached something real in you today, if something shifted, even slightly, in the way you are thinking about the movement of money in your life, tell me in the comments. Tell me specifically, which of the 3 5s surprised you most? Was it the destinations, the questions, or the witnesses? I read every comment personally. I want to know who is sitting with this. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please do that now. I release a new teaching every week drawn from this same tradition, and each teaching builds on the last. You will not want to arrive in the middle of this conversation. And finally, if something in what I shared today reminded you of someone you love, someone who is quietly struggling with the same things you have been struggling with, please share this with them. Becoming a channel for wisdom is itself a practice. The tradition says, the one who brings light to others does not diminish their own flame. They multiply it. May your house be filled with the overflow of what you were always meant to carry. May the decisions before you find their clarity. And may this knowledge, now that it is in your hands, find its proper home in your life and in the lives of those who come after you. Shalom.